Hello and welcome to Spare Change News TV. My name is Sam Baltrusis. I am the editor-in-chief of Spare Change News. Joining me today is the one, the only Mark D. Goldfinger.
Hi.
Mark is one of our longtime serving vendors. He's a former editor. You've done a ton of work, and you're also on the board of trustees, sort of board of directors at Spare Change and the Homeless Empowerment Project. So Mark has a lot of history with this paper. He also is still very active with the editorial. So Mark, so when did you join Spare Change News?
I began in March of '93, and I started selling in Porter Square. And I actually was introduced by a woman who I don't believe she's alive anymore. Her name was Ada.
Okay.
She was a blind woman, and she was selling the paper, and I was stemming with a cup. And she said, "Oh no, do this, go down. They'll give you 10 free papers, and then you pay 10 cents a paper." Back then it was 10 cents a paper, and so I did. I didn't have any real thoughts of giving back to the community or anything like that at that time. I was a homeless heroin addict. And I just thought, well, this is a good hustle to make money. And I started doing it. And all of a sudden, I had like one of those paradigm shifts. I felt like I'm actually working. Like I'm not begging for money anymore. I'm selling a product. And I started to feel good about myself. And that was the beginning, like, of my recovery.
Wow.
So that's why I say, like, Spare Change News has really helped me get clean. I mean, I had to do other things too, but Spare Change News, when you don't feel good about yourself, that's part of the illness of addiction. And I didn't feel good about myself in the beginning. And I thought it was a hustle at first, but it wasn't. It was good, and I became invested in it, and I love this paper.
You're still, I mean, Mark is definitely very active with the paper and still very passionate about just the idea and the heart behind the paper.
Yes.
What I also like talking to you about is the history of Spare Change. And so tell me, like, so you started in '93, and you became the editor, and you've gone through a lot of ups and downs over the years.
Ups and downs, yeah. Well, in 1993, I was a vendor, and I stayed vendor strictly until I got clean for the first time in March of '94, a year after I started selling the paper. I went into detox. It was like, I don't know, my 30th detox or something like that. And I got out and I actually stayed sober or stayed, clean. It depends on the lingo that you use. And I said, I took a course. I took a computer course. Like, people talk about the Big Dig, and the Big Dig there's a lot of talk about it, but one of the good things they had was they had a course for people who had been unemployed for over a year. And I took it. It was a 3-month course to teach you how to use a computer. And I learned how to use the computer. And when I finished that course in September of 1994, Spare Change desperately needed an editor. And I was good at it because I was a bookworm. And, I have an eye for misspelled words and everything. Like, I mean, my own work I need an editor too. But
it's actually really clean. I'll give you credit.
So, but the paper was really in trouble financially. We were almost going under. We didn't really have a board of directors anymore. So Linda Larson and I worked together. She was like a co-editor with me, and we found people. We sought people out who and created another board of directors. And that's, and now I'm a member of the board, but the board went on. For a long time, I wasn't on the board. I became a vendor, and I worked distribution. I've worked I was an editor probably 5 times. Like the first time was like 2 years. And then another time somebody left like really fast. And I was editor for about 2 months because I didn't really want to do it. I was living in a drug program in Gloucester. And
Wow.
I needed to commuter rail, and I did it, but it was hard. But I needed to live in the drug program because I had to learn how to stay clean. I didn't know how, because I was an addict for over 3 decades, and you forget how to live.
In many ways, like, you embody sort of the heart behind the Paper and Homeless Empowerment Project, that it's empowering homeless people, and
Yes.
you found that empowerment through also within yourself as well, but also the paper was a vehicle to help you get clean and also just change your life dramatically.
Yeah.
And so that's amazing.
Yeah, it's one of the only organizations that actually lets people who are homeless or close to homeless work for their money instead of just, they're not getting a handout like a food. There's nothing wrong with like getting food stamps or anything like that, but you can work for, and it gives you a feeling of it gave me a feeling of self-worth, and that was really critical to my recovery and to my getting off the streets. I would do anything for the paper. If I ever got rich, I would invest in, like, poets would get paid, when they,
That would be-
poets don't get paid right now, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, so my first experience with Spare Change was in the early '90s, when I was in college, and I remember actually you were editor. It was like '94, '95 when you were editor. Or you at least
Okay.
you wrote in the paper at least.
Yeah.
And so I remember your name back in there. So you actually had an impact on me from years ago,
Okay.
which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So we have actually, speaking of back in the '90s, we have a documentary from that era with Mark in it. So we're gonna play a clip from that.
Hi, this is Paul Rice calling from Spare Change News in Boston. Hi, how are you doing today? Good. Currently working on an article about the governor's fiscal year '07 budget, and I just wanted to talk to somebody from the Budget and Policy Center because I've been using your guys' breakdown of the budget with specific regards to your work on the housing, on the governor's plan for housing stuff. I'm from Seattle originally and came out to Boston to go to Emerson. It sounds weird to say, but I've always had an affinity for homeless people. Not just homeless people, but people who live on the edge, people who've sort of been rejected by society.
Spare Change newspaper. Spare Change News. My name is James Shearer. I am one of the founding members of Spare Change newspaper. I'm also on the board of directors of Spare Change's parent project and Homeless Empowerment Project. In high school, I was editor of a high school newspaper. I was looking forward to going to college and studying journalism and actually becoming a writer, script writer, all that stuff. And people make bad decisions all the time, and I made a few. Instead of going the right way, I went the wrong way. I made some bad decisions, and I was homeless for a long time because of it. I suffered.
My name is Joe McDonald. I'm the vendor coordinator with Spare Change. In other words, I'm in charge of the hiring and firing of all the vendors who
Yeah, this is actually almost done. So 1962, I was dating this girl. She and I split a bottle of cough syrup. She drank half, I drank half. That's how I began. I never really liked alcohol. When I found narcotics in the form of codeine-based cough syrup, I thought I was home. I've been a writer all my life. When I say all my life, I wrote my first poem that I recall like when I was 15 years old. And then like I've been published in like things like Pegasus, Pine Island Journal of New England Poetry. I stopped writing because as my heroin addiction took over, I stopped writing. You know, heroin, the one thing about heroin is it gives you a gift, okay? But the gift works in reverse, okay? Like, heroin would help me write, and then it took it away. It's true. I went to college. I didn't graduate. Then I used to do more and more. Like my intake increased. I would take barbiturates, Seconal, Nembutal, Tuinal, you know, just different things, Dordan, to boost it up. At a certain point, I was drinking 1 to 3 bottles of cough syrup a day. Okay, I was addicted. People should be treated with dignity, no matter what they do. You gotta sleep with your shoes under your pillow if you have a good pair of shoes. You know, if you have money, you gotta tuck it like into your underwear. You know, like you have to make pouches and really protect yourself. If you're a woman, that's a whole other story. You know, like you won't get raped at a shelter, but there's people like if they know you're homeless, like during the day you have no place to go, and people pray. If a person could just quit and there was no other dynamic that was involved, people would stop and never start again. It would be that simple.
That was so powerful. So it's interesting that that even seemed like that was back in the 90s, like how things haven't changed that much in regards to addiction's still a huge issue.
There's more people using opiates than ever before, I think, in the history of our civilization. It's frightening because the end of it is death. I have so many dead friends, and as a matter of fact, I'm widowed from my when I came and signed up to work at Spare Change. My wife Sasha signed up with me, and she died. We had split up, and I was clean. I was living in a drug program, and she died in a bathroom with a needle in her arm, and it's really sad. She was a good person. She just couldn't get clean. It's a lot of work, a lot of work. I have to repeat certain things. Like I'm in therapy. I have support groups. I have a psychopharmacologist who gives me medication. I take a heroin blocker, and you know, just I work hard at staying clean.
I didn't know that your ex passed from heroin addiction. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to hear these stories, and it's happening today. I mean, you hear people. There was a homeless young woman who passed away in a very similar situation. She was in a bathroom at a McDonald's.
Uh-huh.
And it's just heartbreaking. And do you feel like when it comes to like now that it affects all socioeconomic backgrounds? So it's not just homeless heroin
Right.
addicts. It's also people from wealthy people throughout the state who are opioid and heroin addicts. Like, do you feel like that that there people are making the appropriate choices in regards to politicians and service agencies are they doing a good thing to help the addicts?
I think that addiction is an illness and it should be treated as an illness and not a crime. I wrote an article in the paper of like part of the history of opium, which is, I mean, it's you can't really write the history of opium in one page, but it's so, it's been around. They found opium in the pyramids, and it was still good. I guess the people who were archaeologists and things must have tried it. I don't know, but the sad thing is that if you don't have, not everybody who tries it gets the sickness of addiction, but it's like playing Russian roulette, and you never know. Like that one time, the first time, I was hooked right from my first shot. I loved it, and it was because I had a lot of things in my life that weren't right. I wasn't loved and nurtured growing up, so I had bad feelings about myself, a lot of negativity, and I still struggle with that. It doesn't, I work hard with it. My therapist, she thinks I'm doing a good job, and if she thinks I'm doing my therapist is great. So.
That's a plug for outside help as always, especially in recovery. It's important to not only focus on your sobriety, but also to seek outside help as well to get to the root of why
Right.
someone is what did that satiate? Like, what did that drug like the hole that fills in your soul, and you have to fill that stuff with positive stuff. And like with our next cover story is talking to former heroin addicts and then people who are trying to combat it, like the Gloucester police, who are doing a really kind of like a really great thing in regards to they're not arresting heroin addicts, they're actually treating it as a disease and helping them get help. So that's a big move.
As it should be.
And I was really impressed with Gloucester. Arlington's following suit. They're doing a similar program as well.
Good.
And then I'm talking to like Hand Delivered Hope. Well, I actually just talked about the actual organization, and to a former a young man who is known as Travis the Featherhawk. He actually has been 6 years or they're sober since 2011. So for a couple of years he's been sober. And sort of getting tips on like how to help our loved ones who may be suffering from a heroin addiction. What advice, like looking back, what advice would you give to someone who wants to get clean but they don't know how to do it?
Well, I had a counselor in a detox, and back in 1991, I was on a drug run, and I was on a motorcycle, and it broke down and was on the shoulder of the road, and I got hit by a car. I was almost killed. It took me about 1.5 years to learn how to walk again.
Wow.
And I had to do all this physical therapy. I hated going to physical therapy. I just hated it. But I had to go like almost every day, do exercises and everything. And one of the things that my counselor told me in detox was, well, she said, you wanted to walk. How bad do you want to stay clean? You're going to have to do things that you're not necessarily going to want to do, and you're going to have to do them over and over and over. Think of what you do to get drugs. To get drugs, you have to do things that you don't want to do. To get drugs, you have to hang around with people that you don't want to be with. And they don't necessarily want to be with you. So it's a lot of work. It's like healing from this illness is so much work, but it's worth it. And the longer you stay clean, the better the reward is. I mean, I never want to use again. That doesn't mean I can't. And that's the thing I always have to keep in mind, you know, like my doctor always says, you know, remember, say you never want to use again, but there were times that you woke up in the morning and you said, I'm not going to use today. And all of a sudden I'd be at the phone booth and I'd be calling the dealer. And it was like I was using against my will. And that's what happens when you reach a point with this. It's a powerful, powerful sickness. And I think actually drugs should be legalized and controlled. And I know that's not necessarily.
That's controversial.
Yeah, it's very controversial.
Yeah.
And it's just my opinion, because I know that when I went to prison, I came out feeling worse. And within an hour of getting out of prison, after I was in prison for 2 years, within an hour, I was in the projects copying heroin.
I do. I think that what the police chief Ryan is doing in Arlington and also in Gloucester is the right direction. I think that people, even from my personal experience with addiction, not until I realized that it was a disease, and that we have to treat that disease with various things, that I didn't. That's when I was able to get help. And I think same with people that I talked to, and it sounds like with you as well. Once you realized that it was a disease and you weren't in control, and you had to combat that disease. So you have a poem to read. You're a published poet. I actually went to he was part of a book that was at the Harvard bookstore. That was it was Mitochondria 2. Is that what the name of the book was, or?
Mitochondria.
Mitochondria.
Yeah, I was in both books, Mitochondria 1 and Mitochondria 2, and they still sell them at the Harvard bookstore. I love that store.
And Mark is working on a book, a compilation of former poets who have appeared in Spare Change News with Lee Varon. Are you working on a book as well?
Lee Varon, yes. Yeah, she's the lead editor. We're both working on it together. We're taking poems that have appeared in Spare Change, and we're choosing the best ones that we think, and we're putting them together. And I think Lee has gotten some kind of financial backing, and we're putting this book together. The next time we meet is going to be on the 28th. So, and it's all poems that have appeared in Spare Change News.
I love being a part of a newspaper, being editor-in-chief of a newspaper that still supports poetry. I think that it's such a rare thing these days to have a poetry page. Well, now it's a half page, but still we have it's thriving in our paper, and people do pick up Spare Change for the poetry.
Yeah,
They do. So
They do.
are you ready to read your poem?
I'm ready to read it.
Okay.
Okay, this one's called A Couple of Kids. She sits in front of the 7-Eleven, a cup for spare change in her hand. Her eyes are still clear. He comes out of the store. I've seen them together before. She's quite young, maybe 17 years old. He is quite high on heroin, possibly early 20s, heavy-lidded eyes. He scratches his nose, says, "We're going to get married," he says to me, as he hands her a cardboard sign to hold that says, "Broken hungry, please help." "I just don't have the cash for the ring yet," is what he says as he looks at me with pinned eyes. She says, "Maybe we'll go to Florida where the nights are warm when we get the money." He sits next to her, closes his eyes, his head tips forward. She places her arm around his shoulders. "I got me a good one, eh?" she says with a big smile, wide, innocent eyes. I don't know what to say. I want to shake her, wake her up from whatever keeps her asleep. Her eyes are still clear. He hasn't turned her on to the heroin yet. I can still see them, sitting in front of the 7-Eleven in the heart of Central Square. They haven't got to Florida yet. They're still sitting there.
Wow. I just got
So, I wrote
chills.
that while I was I wrote that while I was selling the paper.
That's
I was
amazing.
watching them. I was watching them, and I was selling the paper, and like I'm a people watcher. I loved. My corner was Tremont and Mass Ave, and I sold. It was the banks have changed all their names, but a guy Hamid sells there now.
He's actually, Amit is our top salesman, top vendor selling the paper, thanks to Mark's hard work for many years and that section of Central Square. So, Mark, it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
It's
I
great.
definitely love talking to you about the history of the
Thank you.
paper, and I have a lot of respect for you for all the work you've done over the years to make my job easier now, because I know that you did a lot of fighting back in the day to make it where it is, because I know that it was tough, especially in the 90s. So thank you so much, Mark.
Yeah,
And
thank
hopefully
you.
you'll be on the show again. And if you have any, if you want to see Mark's work, go to sparechangenews.net.